Being tasked with building something that you didn't create has its own unique challenges. But then when you're doing it from the middle of an organization's, whoo, that's a whole entire level of complexity. In today's episode, I'm going to walk you through how to build the sales culture from the middle of the organization. I'm Dr. Nadia, founder of the Doyen Agency and host of the Sales Culture Unfiltered podcast. And again, in today's episode, we're going to get into the how to's as I wrap up this three-part series around building a sales culture that you did not create. Tune in. Welcome to Sales Culture Unfiltered, the podcast where we get real about what actually makes or breaks high-performing sales teams. I'm your host, Dr. Nadia Y. Brown, a sales culture and communication architect, and I work with sales leaders to engineer high-impact teams that hit their numbers without burning out or breaking down. On this show, we dive into unfiltered conversations with sales leaders, industry experts, and high-performing teams about what it really takes to drive revenue, retain talent, and build a winning sales culture. If you're tired of surface-level advice and want the strategies, challenges, and hard-won wins that actually matter, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Welcome to episode 3. So in the previous 2 episodes, in episode 1 of this three-part series, I talked about just building the foundation, but more importantly, the importance of having a solid foundation when you're building a new sales department, but also your sales culture that goes along with it, right? In episode 2, I just acknowledged the difficulty of being that leader that's stepping into something that is now tasked with building a team and a culture that they did not create. So you didn't hire this team. This team was existing before you stepped on the scene and were tasked with this goal of moving things forward and building this department and this culture. And how do you do that? And so I talked about a little bit of the how to, but I really, part 2, acknowledged how challenging, and it honestly is probably one of the most difficult roles as a leader to step in the middle of it all and to build something that you didn't create, right? And in this episode, I want to talk more about how. How do you do that? How do you build this sales culture from the middle of the organization? So you're not the CEO, and you're also, you're not the decision maker all the time about all the decisions. You're somewhere in the middle. So you have those that report to you, but then you also have those that you report to. And that's an important acknowledgement because it gets to be, you get to be very creative when you are in that situation. So really, the question is, if you're not the founder and you don't have full authority, because you're somewhere in the middle of that organization that needs to have a sales culture that it never had, where do you actually start? Right? Like, you weren't the one that created this. You're not the founder. You weren't the original visionary. Now there's this need for this sales culture to be created, to be built, to be developed. Where do you actually start? And that's what we're talking about in today's episode. Where do you start? So where I like to start, and where we start with our clients, is start with the audit before you actually develop the plan. And that, again, can be counterintuitive for some, but it's really important to figure out what you already have. And so a common mistake is that people just start to jump in with attempting to come up with solutions before really understanding the totality of the actual challenge. So you want to take a moment and actually audit what actually exists right now. Do an honest assessment of where things actually stand, not where your leadership thinks they stand, because those are honestly sometimes two very different things. And even not where people wish they were, but where are you right now? I like to call it, it's the I am where I am assessment. We are where we are. This is it. We know where we want to go. What leadership often thinks is existing is just, it is what it is, right? But this is where we are. This is the truth of where we are, and taking a minute to do that audit. So what are some of the things that you're actually looking for when you're doing the audit or the assessment? One, you want to understand the existing sales DEA. So how does sales actually happen in this organization? What has worked historically and why? So how are people actually closing sales? What has worked and why? Really taking a moment to dig into that, because a bigger piece of that is what are those unwritten rules that truly govern how this team even operates, right? Like that is probably one of the bigger challenges of a sales culture, or any culture for that matter, is the unwritten rules, the ones that we just do what we do and we just know to do it, but no one really ever said like why or how. So really taking time to dig into that. The next one is the knowledge inventory. This is probably one of my most favorite ones, because who actually holds the knowledge and what's living in all these different people's heads? So what lives in people's heads has never been documented. No one has ever written this down. So you have to go through and it's really interesting asking that question around who are all the people involved in the sales process, because there may be certain people that you haven't even considered asking for their input around their knowledge inventory. So again, that's why this audit or this assessment is so important, because it also gives you a clear picture of who all the players are, as you define who all are. Again, who leadership thinks the players are and who team. Sometimes we know that as a team member, we are like, oh yeah, I forgot that they have this one piece, because they may not be officially part of the sales team, but they play a critical role in the actual sales function. So being able to really dive into that and do that knowledge inventory of understanding what pieces live in people's heads so that we can get all of it documented. Then you want to develop your process map. What does the actual sales process look like from the first contact to a closed deal? What does that look like? Even if you don't have it currently, you want to map out that process map. I usually even take it a step further, because closed deal in many cases just means contract, invoice, payment, whatever that looks like. I like to take it a step further and even looking at what does the onboarding piece look like, because the onboarding can definitely impact sales. So I like to wrap that in there. Like, okay, they did these pieces, they signed, they paid, we're good. What happens next? And just being sure to include all of that in my audit and my assessment. Then you want to look at the culture. And this is sometimes a piece that we don't think about when you're focused on just documenting the process. But we also need a moment to look at the culture. And this may require even some assessment or some observation on your part, because some of this is going to be unspoken. And some people may not even know how to put it into words. But you really want to understand what behaviors are being rewarded, what's being rewarded and what's not being rewarded, because that will help you to understand why certain people may be acting the way they do. Again, what gets tolerated, so what behaviors are tolerated, what things are actually ignored, or even I would say who, really paying attention to those people, because that tells you more about the company's values and how they're operating versus what they may have written on their website. So we don't even want to know what that poster says or what. I was like, I won't even say it's baffling, because I think I've just seen it so often that what we say and we have written as leaders and what we actually do don't always correlate. So when you're coming in and you're looking to build this new culture, that is definitely something you want to take time to actually look at. And there are various ways of being able to do that. But that helps you to understand that here's where leadership may have said the values were and how things work, but you will really understand what that will truly look like once you're in there, especially doing a cultural audit, because people are going to tell you the truth depending on how you do it. And you will, of course, through observation, really begin to see what that can look like. I remember working with a client, and we were working through the cultural piece. Like a lot of the process and the document, that piece was pretty set. There are pieces that we're still working on, but for the most part, people knew what to do. It was documented. It was easy to bring people in, get them on board and moving forward. But that culture piece, that was definitely an interesting part. And we were looking to hire, not for sales per se, but sales adjacent. So this role definitely had an impact and worked very closely with sales, but it was not an actual sales rep. We were looking to hire for that position. And we found, oh my gosh, an amazing candidate. And as she was, she was brought on, she was starting to do some of the shadow work, still in that whole trial period, if you will, probationary, and the culture piece that we were still working on. It reared its ugly head, but I think it was that moment of reckoning for my client, who up to that point had really kind of had more of a sail head in the sand kind of attitude, or was in denial about some of the things that were happening culturally, those unspoken rules, that unspoken culture, that how things just operate, because that candidate eventually decided that she did not want to be a part of this team. And it wasn't because of any of the other things. Like, sometimes we look at compensation, we look at this, and look, it was the culture. Like, there were some serious challenges in the culture that needed to be addressed, and it had been a little bit of this going on in terms of, I'm like, okay, here's the things we need to talk about this. And it's like, oh, it's not really that bad. Yeah, it is. To then have someone who hasn't, another party who hasn't been a part of this at all, or a part of these discussions, and I don't even know if she could really even put into words what it is that really showed up for her. But oh, I knew it was culture, right? So really taking a moment to understand what the culture is versus what they just say. Sometimes it aligns, sometimes it doesn't. You're not here to make a judgment. You're just here to make an assessment of where are we and how do we move forward. And the sooner your leadership is bought into the truth of what's really going on, the easier it makes your job to move forward. Like, things got a whole lot easier with that client after that. Cause I'm like, girl, we got to fix this. Like, for real. So understanding that and moving forward is really important. So then the second step is, okay, now that you know where you are, then you want to extract and document before you hire. And I know a lot of times one of your key or first objectives, a lot of times that people are expecting of you, is to just jump in and start hiring. But you first want to document what's going on, all that extraction. Now that you have your audit, you know exactly who you need to talk to, what information you need to get, what needs to happen, what may need to be created, et cetera, et cetera. Now you do that, and then you build it. So you actually build out and process that whole process map. Now we know what those things are, and then we hire. So avoid that pressure or that temptation, if you will, to really put into place what is actually documented, get it documented, get that process in place before you start to hire. So you really want to understand, what do people need in order to be successful, and also to understand what it is that we do and how we do it in this organization. Who's our ideal client? How do they know that they're speaking with the right person? In that particular role that you may be hiring to, what do they do? How do they document their conversations? How do they do their tracking? All of those things should be in place to, again, when you hire, you want that person to come on board and be able to quickly come up to speed. So take a moment to extract the information, now that you know who the keepers of the knowledge are, document the information, build it out before you start to hire, because now you can explain to your new hires your expectations. You can document your expectations, develop your KPIs, and you're doing it from a place of knowledge and awareness versus just grasping at things in the dark and holding people accountable to a standard that doesn't yet exist to support them operating in that particular standard. And then you want to build the culture before you scale the team. So again, it's so easy to say document, 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 done. And then we don't ever address the culture, because you can't really scale a team into a culture that doesn't yet exist. Now you're just adding headcount or adding bodies to a team without the culture. It's just more people operating without direction. So you just have more people running around lost and not really sure, or does they just come in and kind of do their own things, make it up as they're going along, And that makes it really hard to standardize because person A does it different, person B does it different, person C kind of does it a little bit like person A, but not quite because they added their own little twist. And then you don't have a true standard. And that can cause its own problems when everyone is being held to a different standard or assessed on a different standard based on a different standard because nothing has been standardized. So you want to make sure you take the time to build the culture first. And what that looks like, because you may say, okay, Nadia, I hear you saying culture, 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 culture. What the heck does that mean? When I talk about culture and the things that you're building, one, I just talked about standards. What are the standards that are in place so that everyone is being held to the same standard? What are the actual values? And sometimes it means that leadership needs to make some adjustments in terms of how they flow. Great, address that. The behaviors, what behaviors will be tolerated? What behaviors will be rewarded? What behaviors will be reprimanded? All of that needs to be discussed because we need to really be intentional about how things are done here, how things should look here. What does that lived experience here look like before we bring new people into the chaos? Okay? So we want to make sure we do that. And that's what I mean about culture. Being intentional about cultural building really involves having some difficult conversations because it is going to require people to start to model the behaviors they say they want to see. That's why I talked about leadership. So sometimes you run into leaders, and I see this a lot with my founders. You're building a culture, you're building a team, but you haven't yet addressed that whole leadership piece. Leadership does not have to be overly complicated and convoluted, but it does require you to have an honest assessment and be in alignment where who you are and how you operate. That awareness. Once you have an awareness, you can make the adjustments or get the necessary support to support you in that, but you have to be aware. And sometimes leaders are just aren't self-aware enough in order to really see what's going on to develop it. So they need to be prepared to have those conversations, but also to model the behaviors that they say they want to see within the organization. How we're going to address what is or is not working. It can be difficult to address the things when it's not working well. It's like I wanted to just go. But here's the thing, when you're building something new, some things work well and some things are just like, oh, well, we won't do that again, right? Like it's just part of the process. But let's talk about it. Like, how are we going to address this if it's not working? Or how are we going to address someone if their performance isn't to the standard we want it to be? Having that plan ahead of time helps because then you can communicate that to people. You can tell your existing team, this is what this is going to look like moving forward. Here's what if the performance is off or this is off or this is on, this is what happens. People operate really well when they understand what their expectations are. And then you also, when you get to that point where you're bringing in new hires and you are now building that team, you can then also share those expectations, those standards, all of that from day one. At the very beginning, this is what's going to happen. This is what this will look like. This is what we expect. This is how we flow. And all of that is clear at hello. That helps save you a lot of the dread and sometimes the anxiety or even the drama. Let's just be all the way real. The drama that can come when we don't do that and we don't have those pieces in place as we are building. So again, when you're looking at trust, building that trust, and that's something I talked about in episode 2, was before you come in and start doing all the things, pause. Are you building relationship? Are you building trust with the people that you are now working with in this capacity? Because that trust changes everything. When I trust you, I operate very differently than when I don't trust you. The same is true for all of us. We're all human. When we trust someone, we flow differently. We show up differently. We perform differently than when it's someone we don't trust. And a lack of trust is like a cancer. in your organization and to your culture. It's disastrous. It's probably one of the most dangerous things, honestly, in a culture is the lack of trust or the absence of trust. It really is. That's for a whole nother episode, possibly I may do a whole series on trust. So I'm gonna try that. Woo! Focus, Nadia. We're not gonna even go, not gonna go there today. But just know that every decision you make as a leader either reinforces the culture you say you're trying to build or it erodes it again to that whole trust. And trust me, people are watching you. Are you doing what it is that you say you're wanting to do? Are you living up to the standard that you set, right? Are you doing these things? So trust and transparency are so key as a leader and really building a high functioning, high performing culture for your sales team. And then finally, knowing what you can build and what might actually require help. Now, this awareness is really key, especially when you're building from the middle. Because again, in episode 2, I talked about your level of authority needed to match your level of accountability. And that's a big piece of it because there are things that you can build. And then there are other things where you may need, or in some cases will need, leadership, executive leadership support, reinforcement. They may need to step in and do certain things to help lay that foundation for you. So really just knowing what is it that I know I can run with? What are the things that I'm going to need support with? So when you go back to that audit, that is something that to note, this is something, I got it. I got this. I can document things. I can interview people. I can write this down. I can get it all pulled together, pretty, put in one place, done, done. Process map, done. Check, check, check. Other things where I might need more support could definitely be around the foundational work. Because if you don't have support in building that foundation, you won't have the funding, you won't have the support, you won't have the cooperation, right? No matter how much trust you have, is definitely a key piece. So really understanding where you might need those supports, that support from the leaders above you. And again, the authority must match the accountability. I don't know if I can say that enough. It's really important, right? And so also something to note because in sales, a big part for many organizations are referrals. But if the organization is still operating from a referral dependent mindset, and they're not genuinely ready to invest in what needs to happen in order to shift to something that's more proactive or developing that more proactive sales infrastructure, then it's going to be a challenge. Like you're just going to bump heads. So again, when you look at values, but also assess readiness. Is leadership ready to sometimes make the necessary shifts that need to be made to match what it is they said that they want to build? Like I say, I want to build this, but do I really mean it? So that is something where you would need that leadership buy-in to support a shift like that. Now, not every organization will be in that space, but I definitely felt it was important for me to bring that out in this episode because, again, there are things that you can totally do without leadership alignment coming in. Like I said, documenting, talking to people, doing your interviews, your case studies, blah, 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 getting all that together. But then there are some things, again, that align with culture and some of those unspoken rules and the behaviors and the activities that are rewarded versus those that are not. And it can be challenging to shift from a referral based only or mostly referral type of sales organization to something that looks very different. It can be very uncomfortable. It may require hiring in different skill sets. It can feel disruptive to certain people. And so having that leadership support to support you in making that shift, building this new culture is exceptionally important. So while part of your job is most definitely documenting and pulling in things together, part of your job is also being able to name those gaps and then consistently be able to pull on the people above you and get them involved and really get their buy-in and their support because that's important. And it's not that you are complaining, but it is acknowledging those business risks, right? And that also helps when you go into those conversations, you frame it as this is a risk to what it is that we say we want to do. How do we want to address it? And that also just gives you different language for how you have those conversations, which is also very important. So again, when you think about being in that space of building this sales culture from the middle of an organization, maybe you are the keeper of the knowledge and you're like, look, I'm tired of being the only person that holds all of this responsibility because I've been there and it can be heavy. It can get heavy. And you can also see that you have become the bottleneck when you start to look at the bigger vision for the organization. You're like, I cannot be this person to move this forward, right? That could be you. Or again, as I mentioned, you could be the person that was brought in to start to do this, to build this, to really build something that may look drastically different than what is currently in place. And now you're just trying to figure out all those pieces and just like, where do I start? And how do I get these pieces in place? So I want you to understand again, part one, we talked about the importance of the foundation. Part two, we just acknowledged the difficulty of being that person in the middle of having to carry this or build this, something that you didn't create. And again, if you're that person that is the keeper of the knowledge, it can feel a little daunting. And you're like, I don't want to be responsible for carrying this alone, right? So again, just kind of depending on where you are. But, you know, and on the one hand, it's like, oh, great. Well, I'm indispensable. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, that's a heavy burden to carry. So let's look at how do we shift this and how do we move forward? So I want you to really understand that no matter where you sit, you don't have to wait. One, just start documenting what it is that you do know, whether you're the keeper of all the knowledge or keeper of part of the knowledge. Just start to document what it is that you do know. If you're document what it is that you know that you still need, document what you know so far maybe missing, so you know what to look for. Just start there. Start to document what it is that you know, document what it is that you're missing, and start to build what it is there, right? That helps to build a case to help things move forward, but just start where you are. Because once organizations or leaders figure this out, then you can really start to build a sales organization that is no longer reliant on just one person's knowledge, one person's personality, one person's network, one person's moods, right? It's not just one person. And it actually enables that organization to grow a lot faster and have a larger impact when they build something that isn't just solely reliant on one person, right? So if you're just like, okay, Dr. Nadia, all that sounds fabulous. And what? Definitely, if you would like support around this, one of the things that our team does is our sales infrastructure diagnostic. We come in and we support you in pulling those pieces together, really understanding where we are. That's where we start. Like I just told you where to start. That's where we start as a team. And then we can always decide if we want to go farther. So I'll make sure we include information on what that would look like to have a conversation around just being able to move forward and building that for your team. And again, part one, foundation. Part two, just understanding the challenges and the importance of building trust when you are tasked with building this organization. And part three is how do you do it, especially when you're building this sales culture from the middle. Again, I will acknowledge it is not the easiest task in the world, probably one of the hardest places to be as a leader, yet when done right, the results and the impact are priceless. This is Dr. Nadia with another episode of the Sales Culture Unfiltered podcast. Signing off. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. That's a wrap on today's episode of Sales Culture Unfiltered. But the conversation doesn't end here. If something sparked your interest today, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at thedoyenagency.com to explore how we're helping sales teams build cultures that last. And if you found this episode valuable, don't keep it to yourself. Hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow sales leader. See you next time.